Well, good morning. It's without a question my pleasure to be here in Arkansas, talk about the sheep business. I've told a few of you that I met earlier this morning. The one really good thing about this trip for me is I left behind 10 inches of snow yesterday. And that means that my family gets to deal with that in our farming operation. But it's great to be here, and hopefully by the time I get home, we'll be rid of 10 inches of snow. I think that I ended up addressing my talk with the Arkansas sheep opportunity because I think that you folks have some resources and you have things in your favor here in Arkansas that we would only dream of in our part of the world. And it's to some degree going to be up to you to discover how to utilize those resources. But every part of this country, and I've felt for a long time, the southeastern part of the United States is the has the greatest potential for sheep production or an increase in sheep production of any place in the United States. With the grass resources that you have, with the longer growing seasons, we've made sheep production and our model work in the Pipestone, Minnesota area. But we have a whole different climate, and so I'm not going to come here and try to be an expert necessarily on how you ought to be doing it in Arkansas, because you will have unique challenges. But I'm here to hopefully get you thinking about some of the opportunities with vacant chicken houses, with the feed resources that you have, more favorable climate in some ways. I'm going to come to you, and you need to understand that my perspective on the sheep industry is that I'm the third generation of my family to be in the sheep business. My sons are the fourth, and that's not necessarily good. So for many of you, if you're just looking at getting into sheep, you won't have to break 2 generations worth of the bad ideas maybe that I grew up with. And I spent a lot of time in my early part in the sheep business with my grandfather and my father telling me that I was crazy. But we have developed a system that works, and we've had some experience, and I work with about 85 producers in the Pipestone area that have about 40,000 head of ewes. And I work with them on helping make their operations more profitable, more viable in every respect. And so that is going to be, so you understand that's my direction. I'm profit driven, producer success driven, and that will come through in many of the things that I talk about today. So with that, I want to start out by telling you that I think we are just entering one of the golden eras of the sheep industry. We've been through, and if you aren't very familiar with the sheep industry, I guess this will sound a little negative, but we've been through a couple rugged years price-wise in the sheep business. But coming out of that, we have a really great period ahead of us here. We have a growing demand for lamb in this country that's growing every day. And it's driven primarily by ethnic markets. And we have a relatively low supply of lamb to fill that demand. And the pure, simple economics is that if you have high demand and you have low supply, it all equals higher prices for your product. And I think that's the era that we're entering. And we've seen the lamb market take off just in the last 60 days period of time. We went from $1.10 lambs to, in our area, on Wednesday of this week, we sold market-ready lambs at $1.75. So it is a golden era, and it's a great time if you're considering getting into the sheep business because you can get in relatively few dollars, and I think we have a tremendous period of time ahead of us. And so I want to start with that because it's not as though we're here talking about an industry that's failing. I think an industry with its best years ahead of us here. Today, in the time that I'm allotted, I want to talk about 3 major areas. Obviously, sheep production isn't simple enough to boil down into a 1.5-hour talk, But I want to spend part of my time talking about utilizing existing buildings for sheep. And in this case, talk about chicken houses. It sounds from what the information I've received that you have a lot of chicken houses that are probably vacant or maybe vacant fairly soon. And can they be used for sheep? And from my experience working with a few producers who have had chicken barns and chicken houses that they have converted to sheep, I will share with you what we've learned works and doesn't work. I want to also talk about low labor feeding systems. It'll become more clear why I think that's important if you're considering getting into sheep or getting bigger in sheep, that gets addressed. And the third thing I want to talk about is a little bit of the economics of sheep production. And I know that in this room, likely there's those of you in the room that have never owned a sheep, and there's some that raise sheep today. There's others that are just interested in the sheep industry, and so I think it's important that we talk about the economics of it, because I think that helps you then drive the kind of operation that you put together. So those are the three main topics that I hope to talk about today. As we talk about housing then and using existing housing, and we've worked with poultry buildings, we've worked with converting swine buildings, dairy facilities, and all of them have advantages and disadvantages for sheep. But the first thing we need to start out with and understand is that if we're going to put sheep into housing and confine them, or relatively confine them, there are certain space requirements that they need to have. Ewes, generally, you're going to need 12 to 16 square feet, depending on the size of the ewe. When ewes have, and this can be extrapolated into goats as well, for those of you that are interested in the goat industry in the room, basically the goats have nearly the exact same space requirements. Ewes with lambs aside need 15 to 20 square feet. Again, that range is based on size of the animal. If we have lambs that we're feeding out to market and have them confined to a building, they need anywhere from 6 to 10 square feet per animal. And the last thing I have here is feeder space requirement. And anytime that we are feeding harvested feeds to animals or they're in confinement, if we're limit feeding ewes, they need to have 16 to 20 inches of bunk space. And by limit feeding, I'm saying we're giving them X pounds of feed per head per day. They need that much space so they all have a place at the dinner table to get their fair share of the feed. If we move into a self-feeding system for ewes, we need 4 to 6 inches of self-feeder space or trough space for each ewe. And so we need to keep those in mind, because that's going to help tell us if we're going to move sheep into confinement, and I would suggest that in an area where the greatest challenge you might face is internal parasites, and you have somebody far more knowledgeable than me on that topic speaking later, certainly looking at raising lambs in confinement is probably a wise decision. So chicken barns and sheep, without a question, they work. Matter of fact, if we were going to build a new sheep facility, it would look pretty much like a chicken barn. And I'll show you some pictures in a little bit of some buildings that have been built for sheep in our area that probably resemble what a chicken barn would look like. And so they are a great facility for sheep. They need a little bit of retrofitting. A few changes need to be made, and I will talk about those in a minute. To me, a 40 by 300 foot chicken barn laid out in a kind of a labor efficient manner can house 400 to 600 head of ewes, depending a little bit on our lambing schedule and our lambing plan. Or if we were just going to feed out lambs in them, that size building will hold 1,000 to 1,500 lambs. So they're a tremendous facility. If you happen to have one of these barns available to you, they are a facility that can hold an awful lot of sheep, and can become a very viable sheep operation when we talk about these kinds of numbers. This is an example layout of of a barn that that was actually a broiler barn in our area, and how the producer laid it out. This is basically, and you know, it's not to scale, so bear with me here. This has been our most efficient in terms of our labor use type of layout to a poultry barn. You know, this is just the floor plan or the layout of it. And hopefully you can hear me all right. I have a fairly big voice and I don't like being tethered very well. I'm a pacer. But basically this barn here, the producer built is, this is the landing area. And if you think of each of these segments as being 1/5 of the building, or 60 feet. So this is 60 feet of the barn length. This is another 60 feet that goes up to here. And then these are all 60-foot pens. The flow of this barn is that this is the landing area, and this happens, got a little carried away. I got more landing pens or cleaning pens in here than we really need. This particular operation lands 100 ewes at a time. And of course, we have tough winters in our part of the world, and so we think about feeding inside more than you might have to think about here. But these ewes that are close up to landing or in process of landing are fed in this section. They're actually confined after they're done eating. During the day, they're confined to this part of the barn where they land or put into landing pens. And then when at 24 to 48 hours, if everything's going well, we're moving a ewe with her lambs into these grouping pens or hardening in pens. And then after these sheep have spent 24 to 48 hours in this group, they're moved into these larger group pens, in which each of these holds 50 ewes with lambs inside. So we have room to hold 300 ewes with lambs inside in the remaining part of the barn. If we're lambing these groups back to back to back, the last group comes into here and ends up being housed back here. And so that's 400 head. Now we can easily go, this particular producer has moved this up, he lambs 600 ewes through here, but he does it by spacing them out now, and so when he weans these two pens of ewes, he pushes all the lambs from this pen to this pen, and then you can start reusing these pens for the next set of ewes and lambs. The idea behind it, and I guess maybe the biggest point I want to make, is we need to set up things so that the sheep flow well through the facilities. And when you talk about lambing out ewes and moving newborn lambs and their mothers from where she chose to have her lambs to a lambing pen, we want a real short distance. Because it's hard to keep the mom's attention, to keep her convinced that the lambs that you just picked up are trying to move into a claiming pen actually are her lambs. The further you have to go, the less convinced she is that you have her lambs. And then she's going to want to run back to wherever she originally had them. And so we want to keep distances real short. So wherever you land, we want to have a short distance to go to a pen. We want to be able to observe those ewes and lambs because that's why we put them in there. Make sure the lamb has figured out how to nurse, make sure mom loves her lamb and is taking good care of it. And once we're convinced that those two things have happened, we really don't need to have them individually penned. We can start moving them into grouping pens. So short distance to the lambing pen, and then when we leave the lambing pen, a short distance to our grouping or hardening in pen, depending on whatever terms you're used to. And these are 10 to 15 ewes with their lambs in here, and that's kind of the final exam. That's where we find out whether mom can still be a good mother and is taking care of her lambs in a group setting. And it's small enough group size that we can keep close track of them. And then once we're convinced everything's going well there, then we can move them into larger groups and get along fine. So the flow is easy. It's a short distance to lambing pens, short pens to claiming pens, and short distance to our grouping pens. This is an access alleyway. Depending on what kind of feeding system that you have in place, and I'd make the case that you probably can't feed down the middle of these barns if they're only 40 foot wide. But this particular barn has a 10-foot alleyway down it. the middle of it, and that's to bring, be able to run a steer up and down to bring feed in, to bring bedding in, but it's also to move sheep around in the building. And actually, this particular operation sets up a portable working chute in this alley, and it can empty a pen to use out, bring it through the chute, and be able to vaccinate, be able to sort using lambs, be able to do a number of things. So that's a working kind of an access alleyway. Also in this particular layout of this barn, and I'm spending a little more time on it because this is the one that's worked the best in the poultry barns that we have helped convert. These barns all have access doors leading to outside lots. And in this particular situation, these pens are 60 foot long. The lots outside on this particular farm would be 60 foot wide, and they're about 70 foot long. We can have outside lot access, and actually our tendency, if depending a little bit on the weather, is that we want to do our feeding outside, as much as possible. Now, we do have situations, and more this is the case in all kinds of buildings in our part of the world. We're self-feeding soy hulls and DDGs to ewes that are raising lambs for the first 30 days of lactation. And in that case, we would have self-feeders inside the barn, and this access alleyway allows us to bring feed in to fill those self-feeders. It's a really low labor system, but it's also a high feed cost system. But it's a trade-off: labor savings versus feed costs, and we have to look at it all the time. So outside access, I think, is important. It's even more important in the summertime. And in this particular barn, each one of these lots that comes out has a gate at the end of it that funnels into a runway that accesses pastures. When the ewes are weaned and we're in warmer weather, all of our ewes are housed outside. We don't want them inside. And in your climate, that would be probably even more the case. When you get into hot, humid weather, the less animals in the building, probably the better. And if you have grass available, obviously you want to go on and access the grass. So that's a look at what I think is the most successful of our layouts for a poultry barn, and it's a former broiler barn that we've worked with. And in this particular, like I said, this barn is a 40 by 300 foot building. This producer now runs 600 ewes through that in a year's time. He started out with 100, and we liked it. He did well, and I'm a believer in baby steps. I think we need to walk into these situations. But over time, the sheep were profitable. We had the right genetics in place that we make his production level high enough that he's grown to 600 head of ewes. Now that's about maxed out that barn. He's not really going to be able to go any higher without building some other structures or changing his production plan. And his production plan is he's running 100 ewes every month starting January 1st. The month of January he lands 100, the month of February he lands 100, the month of March he lands 100, and April, May 100 each of those months. So I guess if you have questions at some point, we'll certainly be glad to answer those. This is just another attempt that we did, and I would say didn't work as well. And again, it's not to scale. But this access alleyway is along this sidewall, and it was done that way for a couple of reasons. This is a bit narrower barn, and in order to get adequate kind of pen size and shape, we came with the alleyway on one side, which then allowed us to have pens that were deeper and more of them, and then we had outside lots running out of them. And there was no real outside lot access area out this side. This side here was a gravel driveway and a fairly steep incline after you left the gravel driveway. So the place to put locks was out to the south side of this particular barn. And this is just another example layout, and you know, if you get into this in converting poultry barns, you may come up with a better model. You know, there probably are no two sheep operations I've ever worked with in the United States that are exactly the same. Each and every one are unique and different. And so, but this is just another, just to get you thinking, just another kind of a layout for an existing poultry type barn, which tend to be fairly big buildings. Now, obviously, we can convert dairy facilities, we can convert swine facilities, we can do a number of things for sheep, but to me, poultry barns work extremely well. Now, as you go about, if you are in the situation of having a chicken house that you're going to convert, we need to understand that a sheep is different than the poultry that was in there ahead of time. And ventilation is the one big difference in these buildings. Sheep are going to create a lot more, and goats are going to create a lot more humidity. They breathe and put a lot more moisture in the air. When they urinate, they put moisture in the air. If we have a little bit of bedding buildup, we also have moisture coming up off the bedding. We have gases and odors coming up off of it. And so we have a higher humidity environment. We have a situation where we need to remove more air, particularly wet air. And the wettest, warmest air in the building is where? Anybody tell me? Up. Very good. And so as we look at a building, the way that we get rid of that hot, that warm, wettest air that's up in the peak of the building, because hot, warm air rises, and actually if it comes in the sidewalls, which most of these poultry barns would, it comes in cooler, and as it warms, it picks up moisture and rises. And so we found that we have to open up the ridge, have an open ridge in these poultry barns in order to keep a drier environment within the building. And the basic rule of thumb on open ridge is 1 inch of width to that open ridge for every 10-foot of barn width. So if you have a 40-foot wide barn, you need a 4-inch wide open ridge down the full length of the barn. What that does is let that warm, moist air out. That creates a chimney effect, and as that's leaving, it pulls cool air in your sidewalls. And that cool, fresh air is coming in down at livestock level, and then as it warms and picks up moisture and picks up gases, it's leaving out through the chimney. And so the fact that it's leaving is pulling air in the sidewalls. And so most poultry barns are sealed up tight up there, and when we tried to do it without opening the ridge, and it does not work. And so if you were going to retrofit a chicken barn, that's the first thing you have to understand is you got to open the ridge and let that warm, wet air out. Depending on the kind of building that you're working with, a lot of the poultry barns in our area are tin sidewalled with no protection to keep livestock away from the tin. And so if you have that kind of building, you really need to have some kind of hard cover to your sidewall to keep livestock pressure from being against that wall and keep manure from being against that wall. So that means coming up at least 4 foot high with particle board or plywood or some other material that has some strength and keeps the livestock away from the sidewalls. Otherwise, your sidewalls will be gone within 5 years. And then the other thing that generally we have to retrofit is that we need these side access doors to let sheep out into the lots that we have outside, the outside lots. And really beyond that, most of the poultry barns are insulated in the roof, which is exactly how we would build a new sheep facility. We'd insulate the roof. In our country, it keeps us from having frost and moisture condensation on our roof. Helps hold a little bit of heat, although when you open the open ridge up, you lose some. But we need the side access doors, let sheep in and out. And so not much retrofitting. I mean, most broiler or layer barns are very well designed for sheep. Yes?
Have you tried running a standoff hot wire down your sidewalls as a way of keeping the animals off without having to do it completely
We have not tried to run electric fence along the sidewalls. That probably would keep the sheep away. We've not tried it. You get a certain amount of, the concentration that I gave you on square footage, you get a certain amount of animal pressure even against the electric fence. They might get shocked, but somebody pushed them into it and eventually have a hard time holding it. Electric fence generally doesn't stand up well to heavy livestock pressure. It works wonderful if you don't have heavy livestock pressure. But we've not tried that. It may very well work as long as you have a good ground. Your fencer is powerful enough to inflict some pain. Well, they'll stay away from it. That might be a good option. Good point. Any other quick questions before I leave the poultry barns? Yes?
I didn't understand your self-feed, what it was. Soy hulls and what?
What we're self-feeding are soybean hull pellets and DDGs, which is dry distillers grains.
Dry?
Distillers grains. And most of what we're feeding come out of ethanol plants. But also you get dry distillers out of breweries and so on as well. Corn gluten is actually just DDGs. It's another form of DDGs. Okay, corn gluten and DDGs are the same. Consider them the same thing. Yes.
How do you handle the animal waste that's developed inside the barns?
Well, I think that generally it requires some bedding, and we generally, in our situation, we go to what I call manure pack systems. In other words, we're not trying to clean them out on any certain scheduled basis. We just keep bedding on top of existing manure packs. The one exception is if we are continuous lambing through that lambing facility, bringing one group after another, we will get more disease buildup. And so as much as possible, we try to clean that area out between lambings. Okay, so, and more of our models that we're using are that we lamb for 17 to 21 days and we have a 7-day break. And in that 7-day break, we're cleaning out the lambing facility and we're getting the next group of ewes ready to come into it. And then we start lambing that group. So from a health standpoint or disease prevention standpoint, we are making every attempt possible to clean out that lambing area where the ewes drop as well as where the lambing pens are between groups. The rest of that barn where we're moving ewe and lamb pairs to, we just keep bedding on top of existing manure pack.
Is it necessary to treat that bedding area? I'm noticing my sheep are, they're going to be keeping it dry inside the facility. But, years and years of being in that chicken house with chicken litter and putting on your parasite problems build up. And what I always did and what I did with the sheep this time is where I gave them excess inside doing, I softened that floor down a little bit. May not have been of any help at all, but it seemed like it stayed dry. I'm not having much parasite problem on the inside, because I haven't got them confined there, it's just going in and out.
Right.
But is it necessary to treat that floor in the barn?
I would say that if you can lime it, if you can do something like that to help dry it out. Dry conditions kill most bacteria and most bugs that affect sheep, and that also causes internal parasite eggs to die. And so keeping it dry or keeping bedded on top of the existing manure pack is going to keep you ahead of that. And unless your sheep are eating the manure, there is a life cycle, and I know that some of these worm eggs can live a long time, and they don't live as long in our country because our winters are so bitterly cold. But even some even survive 30 below temperatures in the wintertime. And so, but basically time causes that worm eggs to die off, and Your veterinarian speaking this afternoon, I'm sure, can address that far better than I can. But basically, we're trying to clean it and let it sit. The more time we can let it sit before we put sheep into it again, just gives us a better break. And we have some folks that go in and lime. Like a dirt floor is probably hold a few more things, but we can lime it, which helps dry it out, and it seems like those things help. But again, you're in a little different climate, and so you got somebody who's we do most of our lambing when our daytime highs rarely get to 32 degrees in our part of the country, so we have a different set of circumstances, and we're bedding a lot more because of that. And so we're on top, we're staying on top of whatever bad things are in the manure pack. And then most of our manure goes onto fields, crop fields, not onto pastures. And so,
because in the poultry industry, they discovered, I discovered that litter buildup was good because your immunity is already built into the soil. And so that litter buildup, keeps it dry and gets rid of you go to the immunity in your stock is what you do.
without a question, what you're doing is you're exposing them more and they build immunity, yes. But the new generation has to go through that, and that's the group we're the most worried about. That new lamb that's got the least immunity and the least developed immune system has got to face all those things. And so we'd like to let them get older before they get exposed to those diseases when they're better able to fight them off and handle them.
Sir, well, I've got everything you showed, but it's all in concrete. And that's what brought my interest here today was, can concrete work just like the chicken house?
I would say not as well. There are advantages and disadvantages of concrete, but the one disadvantage is that there is no moisture going into the ground. In effect, you've created a kind of a pseudo swimming pool. In other words, any moisture, any urine, any spilled water doesn't seep away. It stays right there. And so it requires a lot more bedding. And generally, we find with concrete flooring that we've got to, we fight moisture. We have to bed a lot more until we get to about 10 inches of manure pack, and then at that point we seem to get along about the same as a dirt floor. But
What I've got is an old chicken hog farm. Everything's built on slopes, slope to
Yeah.
a central drain, washout.
yep, very familiar with it.
I've got the whole works, paired houses, and I was just wondering how they would do on grading. So I've got some areas that's built above ground on grading. And I was just wondering if that would work.
Yes, you have slatted flooring in essence, and
Double pins stacked on top of each other.
okay. And you can make that work. We've converted a lot of what I consider old swine facilities that became outdated for today's swine industry, and without a question, they will work for sheep. They tend to be smaller buildings than what we've talked about with the poultry barns, and therefore don't have quite the capacity to them. But yes, you have a lot of concrete. We've actually had a few producers that converted farrowing facilities that have shallow pits, a 3-4 foot pit underneath them, to a lambing facility, and they're pumping those pits. They have to add water because sheep manure tends to be drier. They have to add some water to the pit. But
That's the washout system that goes into the drain.
you're going to struggle with that a little bit more because most of ours are agitated. They put an agitator in there, and it's a self-contained pit, and they agitate it and then pump the manure out. But sheep manure will pump if you get enough water with it. Now, flushing it through the flush system, I'm not sure how well that's going to work. We've never had anybody really seriously try that. The one producer that did really didn't add enough water, and all he did is plug his system up. And that terminated that experiment. That was done. But it'll work. Generally we don't need concrete for sheep, and it does require a lot more bedding, and it tends to give us more moisture and humidity in the environment. But if you have it, I wouldn't go through the expense of tearing it out. Just understand you gotta,
The goats, that's their home,
yep,
and it's dry.
yep,
I mean, the goat manure is just dry, as it just turns into powder.
yep. And sheep manure will be a little bit wetter, depending, and it depends a little bit on what you're feeding them too. It's,
I got them going out and coming in too.
yep.
And, you can go in there now with brooms, just sweep it
Oh, well.
up. It's house.
It's better than what we're gonna get done in our country. I mean, they're a lot more of a challenge than that, but we made a lot of hog facilities, swine facilities work for sheep. Many sets of facilities work for sheep. Well, I'll keep going. I don't, if you have other questions, we'll have an opportunity to come back and address those. You know, I'm here, and as long as you can grab me by the arm, I will definitely answer your questions, and we have a Q&A a little bit later, probably we can hit that as well. I'm going to try to stay on time before they give me a hook here and pull me off stage. But the next thing I want to talk about is low labor feeding systems. I think that the reason that I want to spend some time on it, that if you're considering the sheep business or the goat business or anything else, we're talking about animals that we have to deal with providing feed or nutrition or meals to them at some point in time. And we became the most, as we looked at getting operations a lot bigger in our region of the country, first thing that we did is we started to track where we're spending our labor. Actually, we worked with the University of Minnesota and did a labor study, a year-long labor study of sheep operations, and the producers sat down and allocated where they spent their time, what kind of activities, and we had about 20 different activities. But the bottom line is, when we got all done with this, what we've learned and what we've learned since, because our best operations today still track their labor. They want to keep managing their labor, and they track where they spend their time. But by and large, when you look at these numbers, we pretty clearly, almost all operations spend about 55% of all the time or all the work you're going to put into a sheep or a goat operation is going to be involved with feeding them and grazing them, managing your pastures and moving them and managing them on pastures. So 55% of all the labor we're going to put into a sheep operation in a year's time is spent feeding them. And so if we're going to make it easier, which would then hopefully allow us to run more animals with the same labor, we need to make sure that we are managing the feeding part to be low labor. And I'm going to spend the next part of this talk on that. The other two highest percentages of our time, as you would expect, lambing accounts for about 10% of our labor. Now, when it's going on, it seems like it's a heck of a lot more, but we only lamb for a few months, and then the rest of the year we don't. So when you look at it on an annual basis, it comes up as a low labor or a relatively low labor consumer compared to feeding sheep. But when it does happen, it's very intense. And then handling sheep, to do things like deworming them, vaccinating them, sorting them, getting them ready to go to market, those sorts of things. We spend about 5%. After that, there's no other activity that we do that consume more than about 1 or 2% of our time. And so from a labor efficiency standpoint, these are the three things that we need to focus on to make sure that we are doing it as low labor as possible. And so I want to talk a little bit about reducing feeding labor, and I put this disclaimer at the top, and it's on every slide, but I just want to bring it out right now, is that there really is not a good way to reduce labor without making a capital investment. In other words, in order to make, put less labor into feeding sheep, it usually means investing in feeders, investing in a feeding system, spending some money, making a capital investment. And that's reality. But today our most expensive input next to feed, our most expensive input is our time. 20 years ago, that wasn't the case, but today it is. Your labor, your time as an individual has a certain value per hour, and it is the second most expensive input you can put in to your operation. So, that said, what are ways that we can reduce labor? You know, the very first one on my list is, and maybe this is my childhood, where we carried water from the house to the barn to water livestock. Or if we really got sophisticated, we rolled out a hose every day and ran water to the barn, and then we had to drain the hose, and by the time we got done, our hands were frozen. I have some pretty weird childhood experiences I'm sharing. But that was the way we did it, because water to all facilities wasn't even an option on most farms at that point in time. And so automatic waters are the #1 labor efficient practice you can put into any livestock operation. So I don't think I have to go much more on that. There's 100 different kinds of automatic waters, lots of ways we can do it. In your climate, you might be able to get along most of the time with a hose on top of the ground. We can't do that. You know, and the question was asked, well, how deep are your water lines? Well, we don't have them 6 foot deep in the ground. We don't have water partway through winter. So again, we're in a different environment. But automatic waters definitely are a huge labor saver. And they also, you know, I've never had the attention span long enough to stand and watch a tank fill. Okay? And so I always think, well, while that's filling, I can run enough and do this other project. And, you know, a couple hours later, I remember I have the hose running. Well, hopefully I remembered a couple hours later, because it could be the next night when I come to water them, and the pen is now a stock pond. But automatic waters help prevent some of those sorts of things, and they eliminate you having to spend much time. Matter of fact, my daily routine doing chores, outside of just taking a quick glance to make sure there's water in the waters, that's all the time I spend watering sheep. The next thing is to understand what kind of feeding system we're going to put into place. And I'm not going to go very in-depth in detail on this, but there are a lot of models out there that do work. #1, there's nobody in our region of the country who feeds their sheep more than once a day. Okay, now that's coming from a background where my grandfather fed them 3 times a day. My dad fed them twice a day. And when I went to once a day, again, I was that crazy kid. But we've really found once a day feeding. We have more even distribution of feed intake, because the aggressive individuals get full and they back away, and there's still feed there for the more timid ones to eat. And they get their fair share. And so we don't have the competition causing us to have fat sheep and thin sheep near as much on once a day feeding. When our sheep are in maintenance in our part of the country, we have a lot of folks that put out 2 days feed every other day. So they're in effect doing chores every other day. Sheep are getting the same nutrients. Now they might consume them all in the first 24 hours. The next 24 hours they're kind of hungry, and they're pretty glad to see you on the 3rd day. But that feeding system gets used a lot, just as a labor reducing thing. As a matter of fact, we have restricted grazing programs where the sheep are given access to the pastures for 12 hours every other day, and they're locked into dry lot. Actually, we get better, more uniform consumption of forage because they aren't very selective grazers. When they go out hungry and they have a short period of time, they tend to eat all grasses and whatever else is out there more uniformly. So it started out as a grazing management tool, and it spun into kind of a labor-saving tool. And we're either rotational grazing in small paddocks, or we're restricted grazing. And by restricted, we're limiting time that they're out. For the people that let sheep out every day, they only let them out for about 3 hours. In 3 hours, they'll eat what they need to have, and they lock them back in. And once the sheep are into that routine, they actually come back to the lot on their own. But again, you have to be there to let them out. You have to be there to close the gate and lock them back in. And then the last thing is the self-feeding, and we've touched on that a little bit. But anytime we're feeding harvested feeds, that's an option that needs to be looked at, whether you're self-feeding big bales of hay, or whether you're self-feeding the soy hull and corn gluten mix. There are options, but generally when you self-feed, I can tell you right now, sheep will overconsume what they need to have by about 100%. And they'll waste, when they have given time, they will waste a lot of feed. So there are disadvantages to a self-feeding system, which drive up feed costs. So feeding methods then, the first, what I just talked about are possible systems, and I'm just trying to get you folks thinking, okay? And you'll end up devising this plan that works best for you. Fence line feeding for us, as we've gotten larger size operations, is the way that we control the quantity of feed sheep get, and we can mechanize it. Our cheapest form of mechanization. Yeah, pens. I have a tractor that's broken down right now, so maybe by the time I get the repair bill, maybe it won't be a cheap feeding system. That's why I spent time on the phone this morning making sure that the mechanic was going to get it fixed, because I'll have some pretty hungry sheep, and I'll have some sons that'll be pretty disgusted with me. So anyway, this would be the lowest cost fence line feeding system we can put into place, and this is on one of the sheep operations that I work with. This particular operation has about 1,200 ewes. This is just a 2x12 board, a 9-inch opening, and then a 2x6 or 2x8 board. Basically, the post space about every 10 feet. And then we need some kind of barrier on top to keep them from jumping over. It isn't going to have livestock pressure. It's a visual barrier. And sometimes it's 2 strands of high tensile wire. Matter of fact, that's the most common. The high tensile wire that they electrify up on top. But these bottom 2 have to be rigid, because when the sheep puts his head through to eat, they're pushing on this board and they're pushing on this board. And in case you haven't figured out, the boards need to be on the inside of the post so that they don't push the nails out. But we can build that fence line feeding system the cheapest of anything. And then we just basically drive along and put feed on the ground. And if we don't get a big snowstorm, we got to clean snow out of there. What happens is the sheep can only reach this so far out, and I don't know how clear it is. You can see a ridge starting to form along here. We don't remove that. We let it sit there. That becomes over time becomes our back ledge of our system. So that we have, the next day when we come to feed, this is all eaten out here except to this spot. So there's kind of a trough along there on the ground. Yes?
Do you have some sort of formula around you how much that type of fencing would cost, like say per acre? Do we have any idea?
Well, this would be in our dry lots, and we're trying to put up the least amount that we can, but the last time that I saw that someone put some in, and we sat down and calculated that this was running about $8 a foot. I'll show you some other fence line feeding in a minute. It's a concrete fence line feed bunk, and that's going to get upwards of $18 a running foot. So this is our cheapest system. The other advantage to this is that if we, obviously see snow. In our country, when we get that kind of snow, anytime after December 1st, we're going to have it for 3 months. Okay, so we live with it. But if we get big snowstorms or get winds that drift this in, we have to come along and clean it out. And this particular system, we can come along here with a tractor loader or skid steer loader and clean the snow away so we can get through with the tractor and the feed line. Now, you can also, the same feeding system, if you have a smaller flock of sheep, you can feed by hand along there as well. You know, small square bales to feed grain or whatever. I mean, it doesn't, it's not like the minute you build a little bit of this that you have to have a tractor and feed wagon. But on a larger scale, that obviously makes sense. And in this particular operation, and for most of them, 1,200 ewes, from the time he starts up his equipment to load the feed wagon and feeds the sheep, it's about 1 hour to feed 1,200 head of sheep. Yes.
Of course, we don't have this cold or the hard ground when it gets cold, so we're looking at rain and mud and probably hair sheep. What about shelters and how would you handle mud?
Well, we have mud too. All of that white stuff turns to mud, and in April and May we are muddy, very muddy, and we don't dry out probably as quick as you. But I mean, again, this area here has no sheep traffic, and generally you lay the feed on top of it. I mean, it doesn't get mixed with mud or dirt. It may pick up a little moisture. It's raining out, obviously, it's getting wet, but they'll eat that too.
But how do the sheep do with the mud?
You know, if I had an ideal world, I would raise sheep in the desert, but then I don't have feed. Okay? You know, my family, we own about a 5,000 head sheep operation in Wyoming. And we're running in, I'd say, more of a Midwest model. Hey, that's the best climate in the world to raise livestock. Very little moisture. But if you aren't located next to an irrigation system, you get feed, you got a problem. So dry is always better. And you know, we try to, when we build these, we try to do some dirt work so that this is the high spot, and that we try to slope this back about 4 or 5 feet so the water runs back away from the fence line, and out here that we have a little slope so the water runs away from it. So if we've got it right, the highest spot of this fence line feeding system is about a 6 foot wide band right through here. So we get some water away from it. But even at that, it gets muddy. The only way we avoid that is to put it in a building, and now we're talking a lot more money. So, you know, we deal with mud, probably not to the degree you do, but we have no problem putting that feed on top of wet ground. The sheep eat it within, you know, whatever ration we're feeding, our ewes are going to eat it within 3 hours. So,
What's the poundage rate you feed?
pardon?
What is the poundage rate?
It depends on stage of production.
Okay.
And I don't want to get too much into a nutrition course, so that's an entire seminar in itself. We feed a lot of corn silage types because we're in corn and soybean country, and our cheapest feed, roughage, is corn silage. And probably the most corn silage we feed is about 6 pounds per ewe per day. If we're on hay and grain diets and the ewes are in late pregnancy, we're going to be feeding about 4 pounds of hay and about, well, it depends on the productivity of the flock, but a pound and a half of corn. That's kind of a standard ration. And then when they're lactating, if we're going to feed alfalfa hay at about 5 pounds and about 2 pounds of corn. So we're putting out generally somewhere in that 5 to 8 pounds of feed a day. Depending on stage of production, depending a little bit on what kind of feed we're feeding. And we're running now I've got to qualify this, we're running generally 160 to 180 pound ewes. Ewe size will affect how much nutrition they need.
See, down here, see, you've got possibility of grass.
Yes.
Like this picture is showing dirt. I can put that situation on grass.
You got it. And I think that's one of your greatest assets that you have here in terms of feed. I envy. My grass has been done growing. We've been grazing stockpiled grass. In other words, grass in paddocks we let grow up, and we've been grazing those off, and now 10 inches of snow screws that up a little bit too. Not bad, you just know what's down there and they're digging. But what we're gonna be done with our stockpile grass here about basically this weekend, we were planning to come off of that stuff and come into dry. So we have at the most 180 days roughly that we can utilize grass. Well managed, we might be able to push that to 200 days a year. Where I would assume in this part of the country, with good management, good grazing management, good pasture management, you ought to be able to go 300 days, I would say, at a minimum on grass. I would think, which, you know, I envy that. I mean, I drive here and I look at this grass growing, it's green yet, and I thought, oh, wow. You know, I mean, so you do have some huge advantages over to our system. And I would, you know, but again, it takes good management on the grass as well. I mean, it's not just a matter of you got this big grass pasture, throw all the sheep out there, because that's probably not going to get you 300 grazing days a year.
How about ryegrass? Ryegrass, winter grass, they eat that?
Yep, they'll eat that. You fine. We plant some ryegrass as a cover crop on our cropland, and then we come and graze it about this time of the year. It's annual. We're planting annual right now.
But we can graze it all winter long.
Right, and I would say if I were down here, I'd figure that I could manage this grass to graze 300 days of growing grass a year, and then I would be figuring out a way to stockpile 65 days of grass so that I could continuously graze sheep.
What about oats and wheat?
They'll eat it too. Sure.
Any of those type?
I'll tell you, sheep are very, very versatile, and because of their size, even if they can only consume a limited quantity, they will get along. They'll utilize those feeds and get along pretty darn well. I mean, it still takes a manager to be evaluating body condition and figuring out whether they're getting enough or not. I'll work with producers who feed their sheep almost during their winter non-grass growing time of the year. They're feeding col onions and col potatoes. You know, the sort-offs from the potato and onion industry in their area in the state of Northern California, even into Idaho and some of those. Sheep are very versatile. We feed a lot of byproduct feeds. We've had a heck of a lot of them until everybody decided they would work, and then prices went up and they weren't cheap as buy all the time. And of course, we can make argument in our country now with land values getting to $10,000 an acre that growing grass on that land probably is not cheap feed anymore either. Matter of fact, very little of our land that could be crop ground is in grass. I mean, those days it came and went. Our permanent, our non-farmable land is the only grass that we have, which has moved us more into dry land. We actually have a lot of our sheep operations that the sheep are in a lot like this year round. They don't grow grass at all anymore. Anyway, this is just another fence line feeding system, only under a roof. We don't have to deal with mud here. And these are concrete fence line feeds, bumps made for sheep. There you can see a door on that end, and of course back here where the picture was taken, we have another door. This barn is 400 and some foot long, happens to be 60 feet wide. The one thing is, if you're going to drive a tractor and feed wagon down through the middle, you need 12 to 14 feet out of the middle of your building to be able to get that done, and it's pretty expensive feeding space all of a sudden. Because you had to build a roof over all of it. But that's this particular barn that this is again another operation that's around 1,200, 1,400 ewes. This is a barn just strictly for ewes with baby lambs inside, and so he wants to have them under roof and out of the weather, and he comes through and puts feed in. You know, drives down, feeds one side, turns around outside, and comes back and feeds the other with a feed wagon. It's a low labor feeding system, but this one here, it accomplishes the same as this last slide, only it costs about 4 times as much. Not figuring the building, just the feet, the bond metal, the concrete bonds cost about 4 times. Okay, so this is another seed feeding system fed with a feed wagon. This particular operation is about 600 units. This is what we call an in-lot fence line feeding bunk. Sheep can eat out of both sides, and actually the producer gates the ewes to one side, drives along and puts feed out, so half of them are eating. He gets done, he gets up, opens the gate, and lets the rest of the ewes around eat off the other side. And so one thing about the other fence line feeding system, it takes a lot of feed, a lot of space to put those in if you got any number of animals. So, again, the best system I've heard here is if you can figure out how to graze 365 days out of the year. And I think that's doable for you. It's not even, they will commit you in Minnesota if you say you can graze sheep 365 days out of the year. This is just another low labor kind of feeding system that at minimum keeps you out of the sheep pen, okay, so you don't have to fight sheep. But this is all a hand-fed system. This is a 4-foot wide alley that they can bring, a grain cart up and down, a small grain cart up and down to feed grain. They can wheel small square bales up and down this alleyway and put feed into these fence line bunks, and then there's bunks that run out into the pen. Again, this would be a barn not that was built for sheep, but it'd be similar to a poultry barn. A little higher sidewall, but similar. This is just another attempt. This happens to be a hoop barn, which in our part of the world, these are really popular nowadays. This is our cheapest housing, and it's our best ventilated, best air quality housing that we can build in our barn. But this is an alley along one side, which would be similar to what the poultry barn would be. And this particular barn is 40 foot wide, so again, similar to what a poultry barn would be. This is an alleyway where they have it actually wide enough they can bring a small skid loader up and down here and bring hay in, and bring grain in, and then they feed the sheep by just throwing the feed into these bunks along this fence. So again, if you do nothing else, don't get in with the sheep. You can eliminate that. Another idea is what we call a kitchen concept of feeding sheep. And in this particular operation, this producer is feeding sheep on big round bales or big square bales of hay in the lots in the wintertime. This picture was taken in the summer. And he feeds all the grain in this spot here, and actually we should have had the picture back a little further. There's a big bulk bin that's got grain in it here. So he's got the grain close by, and he puts the grain out, and he lets the sheep in there to eat grain, and when that group is done with grain, he locks them back out, puts grain out to the next group, and lets them in. In this system here, this pen here can come in, and that's back here can come in and eat grain. There's another pen that can come in here. There's another pen that can come in this gate here, and there's another group that runs down there that can come in that gate. So he can have 4 different groups of sheep and feed them all grain in the same spot. So less investment, 1/4 the investment in grain feed bumps, and has the ability to let and he has them where he has the grain, so he lets the sheep come and get the grain and carry it back to the pen the next time. So it's another kind of a labor saving and to some degree an investment saving in grain feeding equipment. Now obviously this one was taken at a different time than the first one with snow all over the ground. This is what we'd like it to look like 365 days out of the year. The last one is self-feeding, and we've talked a little bit about it. Anytime we self-feed sheep, we need to look at labor savings involved with self-feeding versus increased feed costs, particularly when we talk about ewes. Now lambs, we self-feed all of our lambs. They're generally on all grain diets. And it's the most efficient labor use that we can have is to self-feed those. That's just our model. It may not be the same for you. But when we self-feed ewes, we know that a ewe will eat twice what she needs to for any stage of production. Okay, this soy hulls and DDGs we talked about, or corn gluten, we know that if we self-feed our ewes, they will eat about 8 to 9 pounds of that a day. Now, how much do they need to have to be when they're raising lambs? Well, they probably need about 5. So they're way over consuming. And so there's a cost involved with that. So you always have to weigh out labor savings versus feed costs, increased feed costs. Even when we feed big bales of hay, number one, you need big bale feeders around them. For goodness sakes, don't put out a big round bale of grass hay and don't have something around it because you'll waste half of it. But even here, and this is not showing up quite as clear, but there's hay wastage around this big bale feeder. And this is one of the better big bale feeders that we use. They have the least wastage on them. So they waste feed, but this is a self-feeding system. Now, the question to ask yourself, and the question I ask myself and everybody else does, is that, is the amount of labor I save pay for that wasted feed? We're not in a business to make manure. But that's what we're doing when we waste here. We're turning a bunch of good feed into manure. And so we have to weigh that out, and it'll be different with each operation. But one thing for sure, we're going to do everything we can to minimize the waste if we're going to go to this type of self-feeding harvested hay to sheep. Yes. Pardon? We have, well, most of our producers in our area grow their own hay. Am I? No. No, until last year I was a genius. Last year I was an idiot. Generally, our land cash rents for a lot of money, so we cash rent out most of our land. And I always said I could buy the kind of hay I want for the stage of production I want way cheaper than I could raise it. Now last year that wasn't true, as I'm paying $300 a ton for hay. That's what a drought will do. We generally have bought all of ours, and that's in part because I'm spending a high percentage of my daily time away from the farm, and I don't have time to put up hay. And I used to feel that same way about raising corn. I really didn't need to raise corn. I could buy it cheaper and I could raise it. Well, that hasn't been true either. So in the last couple of years, but you know, as a general rule, most of the producers in the production area, they raise their own. They raise a lot of grass hay, and they'll raise a lot of alfalfa hay. And if the alfalfa hay is really, really good, and they can sell it to a dairy for a lot of money, they will sell it and then buy back lower quality hay at a lesser price. This is actually I talked about self-feeding ewes with lambs inside, feeding them the soy hulls and DDGs. Well, here's a couple self-feeders. This is a group of lambs that all happen to be pretty curious about these crazy people with a camera down here standing on the edge, but you can see their mothers right behind them. These ewes are being self-fed soy hulls and DDGs. They're confined to this hoop barn. It's a 40 by 110-foot hoop barn. It has 225 ewes with roughly 400 lambs on them in that barn. In this case, it's the producer says this is labor saving. He's got enough feeders, and you can't see the ones on the other end, but he has enough feeders that he fills those feeders about every 10 days, 10 to 14 days. And so basically, once he fills the feeders, then for the next 10 days, he doesn't feed any animals in that barn. He still has to walk through the barn and make sure that he's picking up any sick lambs or sick ewes. He still has to bed in that building, but he's eliminated feeding on a daily basis. Yes?
You put out, you said soybean hull pellets as a self-feeder. Does it feed anything
No, we don't feed any kind of long stem feed. However, when we bed this building, every other day or so, the ewes are picking through. We generally are using straw or corn stalks to bed, and they pick through, and they're picking up some roughage there. And it's noticeably different. I mean, when you bed, they're looking for some roughage. So yes, they're getting some, but we're not feeding it roughage in any kind of organized manner. Now, the soy hulls are a relatively high fiber feed. But yes, I mean, they are getting some roughage, long stem roughage through the bedding.
With the holes, it's not enough roughage.
It is. They just eat more of it. And that's, but it would have enough fiber. I mean, you would run into no health problems if that's all they had. So in other words, if you put these sheep on expanded metal floor or slatted flooring where you weren't bedding every day and just self-fed this, they would get along fine. Again, we are only feeding this ration for the first 30 days of lactation, and then we quit it because it's too expensive a diet to keep feeding any longer. So we have to make sure that our lambs, our age spread of our lambs in that group are really narrow. In other words, they try to get no more than 10 days age spread in there, and if they can get 5 days age spread, that's a better deal. Because then they can change that ration and drop it at 30 days. When the lambs are 30 days old, they drop off of that, and actually what they do is they go to bedding that barn with grass, hay, or straw. And for 2 weeks, that's all they get is grass, hay, and straw that they're eating and bedding themselves partially in, and then they wean. And we run an early weaning system.
But there's a lamb creek feeding system in there.
Yes, ooh, very good. Thank you, Jim. Yes, I mean, all of our lambs are started from almost the day they're born. They have access to a creep that has a lamb creep ration in it. So our lambs are, by the time they're weaned, our lambs are eating creep feed. And so the transition from mom to lamb. Matter of fact, if we move the ewes to a different farm, we don't have any bellering. The lambs don't even know the mom's gone. Well, they know she's gone, but it's not like they miss her. I mean, they just keep eating the feed that they have in front of them. And of course, we are moving the ewe away, and we're leaving the lambs where they know where the water is, they know where the feed trough is, they know all of that. I think that we would stress our lambs a lot more if we weaned and moved the lambs to a different building that they weren't familiar with, then we'd have more trouble. But this is a pretty low stress system. And of course, if we're drying them up for 2 weeks on straw that they're eating for bedding, mom is producing very little milk at the time that we wean the lamb. So the lamb has already, increased his feed consumption in the creep area because he's not getting near as much milk from mom. And then we don't ruin near as many udders on the ewes. I mean, and so we're trying to make the thing work for us both ways. This is just this is a bunch of lambs being self-fed. These lambs are probably about 3 months old in our part of the country, and they're self-fed an all-grain diet, kind of corn and a balancer pellet diet. We may feed some soy hulls in there for a little bit of roughage. But our lambs, under our system, we're marketing lambs. We have a different market than I think is probably your best marketing option here. But we're selling 130, 40-pound lambs at roughly 5 months of age. At 6 months of age, most operations, any lambs that aren't market ready, they sell anyway. So when they hit 6 months old, we liquidate the whole works. Pardon? All of our lambs, because of the kind of lambs they are all going, we have, as a group, have a marketing contract with Superior Farms, and so they go to Denver, Colorado. What kind of those we're breeding? These would be pretty much all of our ewes in our area are wool sheep, number one, partially because of our climate. And they're polypate type of ewe. They're roughly quarter fin, quarter Dorset, half rambler. And these speckle faces are generally would be sired by Hampshire Ranch.
You have a corporation started that allows you to sell the sheep together.
Yes, we, for almost 20 years, we've had, we get a contract and right in the middle of negotiating a new one for the group. But we have a contract that guarantees us a minimum price and then a percentage of the upmarket above that. And we're selling our lambs on a quality grid based on yield grade, carcass weight size, health values, and so on. So yeah, we have a marketing agreement with, and this, right now it's with Superior Farms. We have actually 3 different processors submitting bids on our lands now for the coming year. And next week we will have meetings with all our producers to present those proposals, and they'll choose who they're going to go with.
Would you say that the market is strong enough or is going to be strong enough that it wouldn't be difficult to find buyers for?
I think we're into a period where there will be buyers for land. That shouldn't be an issue. You know, in our country, the question is if you produce an above average quality product, you get paid for it. And the answer is no, if we sell it on a cash market basis. All of our cash markets in our area, and I spent just enough time as a land buyer to know I didn't want to do that. No offense, basically. But I learned a lot out of that about 9 months I spent in that job. One of them is that you pay an average price. In other words, am I a very smart buyer, or am I doing the right thing if I pay Joe Smith, $1.40 for his lambs, and then his neighbor, who he talks to all the time, comes in and you pay the neighbor $1.20 because his lambs aren't as good? Well, you think he's going to be a happy camper? No. So what I do is I buy all the lambs at $1.30. Okay? So the guy that's got the lambs that are really worth $1.40, well, he's not getting what his lambs are worth. The guy that's got poor quality lambs that are worth $1.20, he's getting a premium. And so it's, if you're producing a high quality product, you don't want to sell on that system. That's in our case. I mean, and so when we're selling all of ours on a kilogram basis, where we're paying based on carcass quality and count values and all that stuff. So if we have high quality land, we get paid more money. I mean, and that may not be an option, although I would tell you in the sheep industry, the more you can work as a group of producers and work together, the more power you have in buying inputs, the more power you have in getting a price or a marketing situation where you maybe can get more money or get paid based on quality. Individually, none of you, I'm sure, in this room, because none of the people we work with are big enough to do it on their own. And the strength of what we do is on numbers. I mean, we have 50,000 lambs roughly that we contract or market a year, and that 50,000 lambs, partially because when they come to market when supply is pretty short. We have every major packer in the United States wants the land, wants the chance to buy them.
Are the fees for becoming a member of the corporation, the services that the corporation provide?
Right. It's, there's nobody here that'll ever get back to my administration. So we are an educational program at Minnesota West Community Technical College, and much of the majority of what we do is education. We're working with producers, teaching them how to raise sheep better, how to balance their operations and all those sorts of things. But there is this little service component that kind of comes along with it. One of them is the land marketing contract. We also buy some inputs together. We buy a lamb milk replacer. That's the one that we have one of our producers working on that right now. But we buy a semi-load of milk replacer and we put it out on bids, and it looks like milk replacer is going to cost us about $35 a bag. And I'm sure for many in this area, you're probably paying closer to 50. I mean, so it's things like that because of the size of the group, and those are service things, they aren't education. But, yeah.
who is eating all these lambs? Now, I don't want to work so you're saying y'all are like this. I mean, what part of the country or part of who is our marketing to? I know it's ethnic.
The majority of the lambs consumed in the United States are consumed on the two coasts. Okay, and I could throw a number at you, but it's a guess. But there's very little that's consumed in between. And part of it is that we only have X amount of land that we're producing. And the markets are set up for those two coasts where the high population centers are. And so no one's trying to build a market here. No one's trying to build a market in Minnesota. Now, in Minneapolis, we have there is some land. There's land available in some of the retail grocery stores. But for the most part, the packers and processors that are selling this product, they've got their marketing set up on both coasts, and they're putting zero effort in marketing any here locally. And so that's where it's consumed. It's basically produced west of the Mississippi. That's where almost the majority of the ewes in the United States are. And it's consumed on both coasts.
Do you share organizational structure of your different farm?
I could later. I mean, in effect, you know, in a real simple version, we were a program set up 30 or 40 years ago this year to work with producers to help improve production levels, improve profitability of the machinery. I would say it's the old version of the extension service, the really old version where they work one-on-one with farmers, and that's basically the model that we use. And it's grown over time. The model that, I mean, what we're doing has been successful. Our sheep numbers in the 125-mile area of Pipestone that we cover we have 3 times as many sheep today as we had 40 years ago. Meanwhile, everywhere else in the United States, sheep numbers have declined. We're the only, you talk to anybody looking at demographics, they will tell you that that's the only spot in the United States where numbers have actually increased dramatically. Everywhere else has declined.
Except the southeast.
Pardon?
The southeast, if you look at it, the southeast has increased.
Yeah,
like you said before.
Right. And honestly, I mean, like I started out my talk saying, the southeast part of the United States has the greatest sheep potential of any place in the United States. It's being underutilized. And I mean, you have resources here that we only dream of. And we've touched on some of them. I don't want to get off track too much on philosophy here.
I noticed in your outdoor pictures that your fences were not very high. How do you control the wolf attack?
Predator loss?
The wolf.
We don't put lambs out where coyotes are our primary predator in our region. We have domestic dogs would be our second. We don't have much other predation. Now you go to other parts of the country, you have wolves, you have bobcats, you have a variety of things. But coyotes are our one. And if we don't put lambs out on grass, all away from our buildings, we don't have predator loss. We can put ewes right out there, and we do not lose ewes to coyotes. We see coyotes running through our ewes, you know, to get somewhere else. And I mean, we just don't have predator loss when we put mature sheep out there. And in the West, you know, and we have an operation there. The reality is that we went to all early weaning, and we don't turn our lambs off the range either. We turn mature ewes out, and we have zero. Well, we have some predator loss, but I suspect it's an old sick ewe, whatever. But I mean, it's minimal. But people who turn lambs out on grass with their moms, or lamb out on range country, they have big predator loss. The coyote is a small animal. They like to prey on something the size of a rabbit, or I don't know if you have pheasants here, but that's the size they prey on. Well, any lamb is perfect. Fits right into that. And so they'll pick those off and they're easy to get because they physically can handle it. Now to take on 160 or 180 pound ewe, they got to be pretty darn hungry. and it takes more than one. So we don't have predator loss. We actually have more domestic dog issues than we have anything else. Yes, Jim.
Besides Mill Creek Placer, what do you buy in bulk for the whole group? Any other, are you able to buy contract or any other things?
We are buying some of our feed inputs, like our lamb balancer pellet that goes into these lamb finishing diets. We actually have one elevator that a group of our producers go together and they contract, I don't know, I think last year was about 500 ton. And they get a real reduced price on it. And we've had situations, we had a period of time when we first entered into the marketing, there are lambs on a quality grid where we really need to kind of know what our lambs weighed, because certain carcass weight range was worth more than others. And so we had several producers wanting to buy scales. And I think we ended up with 11 scales that people wanted, and we put it out on bids. We had certain scale companies that we liked the scales, and honestly I was shocked. We bought those scales at half of what retail would be. Buying just 11 of them. But I mean, those are a couple examples of things that we do. And of course, once you get producers working together, there's also a lot of information sharing. When we have meetings, we have educational meetings for our producers in the winter months, and when we have our meetings, I've always said that half of the educational value of that meeting is the producers sharing ideas. Or talking about problems they're having in their sheep operation, and the others are all listening and go, well, what worked? How'd you correct it? And then that way, if it shows up in theirs, they got to jump on how to handle it. So there's a lot of value in producers working together, and in a small industry, there's even greater value. Because sometimes we don't have the support industries or allied industries that are even paying attention to us. We don't have the infrastructure. Okay. I don't even know where I'm at on time anymore. Do I have a half hour yet, or?
You've got 20 minutes.
Ooh. Okay, speed course now. I'm about done with reducing labor here. Automation of feed, and it just shows, this is an auger system that delivers feed to these feeders for lambs on feed. And that's a pretty typical concentration for, these would be roughly 60-day-old lambs in our facilities. But you can see the overhead auger system, it runs from a bulk bin, and so these feeders can all be filled without doing it by hand. We also have some producers who have automated what we call push augers, where they tub grind their hay and mix in grain and do a TMR ration, and then it's augered down through the building and with an auger that drops it in a feed trough, and the sheep eat that way. I mean, those things all cost even more money. I mean, that's a bigger capital investment, but those are labor-saving ideas. The last one we've already talked about a little bit here. Hey, just extending the grazing season for us by 2 months saves labor. Going on crop residue. That's where all of our ewes are right now. They're digging through 10 inches of snow, eating corn stalks and crop aftermath. And we always hope to get to the 1st of January. That's a labor-saving system. Those are other ways to reduce our feeding labor. Just simply extending the amount of time where the sheep are doing the feeding. They're feeding themselves by going out and getting grass, going out and getting the corn stalks and whatever. The last thing I'm going to finish up on is what I call a formula for profit, but it's just simply to talk about economics a little bit. And this is the way we look at it, and so may not fit you as well, but every year we sit down with our producers, or we sit down and we look at last year's performance records, their financial records and their production records, and we come up with what our current feed prices are and stuff, and what we have to have happen to make $40 net return per ewe.
Is this very current?
This is this isn't relevant to us because I plugged in some, plugged in a feed costs that may be right for you or might be wrong. I don't know the right answer. But what we do is say, okay, assuming, and by the time we do this, we will know what our contract is and what our minimum guarantee is, but assuming that we get $1.40 a pound for our lambs live weight, and we mark it an 8-pound lamb, which, you know, if you're marking the athlete trade, that's probably the upper side of what weight lamb you're gonna sell. And if we want to make a $40 net return for you, then what has to happen in between in terms of production and financial or cost inputs in order to make that $40 net return. So the blue is the assumptions. The blue is also what we want to set all of our sheep operations up so that we manage it so we make at least $40 per ewe. Now, hopefully we make a lot more than that, but we want to make $40 per ewe. And the black numbers say, okay, in this situation with that price and that weight lamb, to make $40 a ewe, what has to happen? Well, we have to market a lambing percentage of 185%. We have to feed our ewe for a year's period of time for $50. Now, we can't do that. I don't understand. You know, this year, if we get it done for $75 or $80 a ewe in our country, but we feed a lot of harvested feed. That's the most expensive. Lamb feed costs, feed this 80-pound lamb, we gotta keep the lamb feed costs to feed each lamb to about $30. Other operating costs, this is for veterinary health supplies, this is for utilities, it's taxes, it's all the other costs of production, ear tags and whatever else you buy to put sheep in production. We need to have that operating cost at $50 per ewe. And that includes interest on a loan at the bank. Our fixed costs, I just plug in building, $12. If you're retrofitting a poultry barn and laying it, you know, putting gating inside and so on roughly a 7 or 8 year payback, it's going to cost about $12 a year until you have that all paid for. So that's the number I plugged in. By the time we're all full. Other fixed costs to purchase used, figuring that we're going to lamb them at least 6 times. We're going to pay $175 for them, which today you can probably buy used for $175 pretty easily. So we're spreading the cost of purchasing that ewe over 6 years and taking out a little bit of salvage value. We realize not all of them live to be marketed as cull ewes, but some do. So that's a fixed cost that we have to pay for in spending. So if we can make those things happen, okay, we can make $40 net return at $1.40 land. Now, you know, I put this together 2 weeks ago, and right today, you know, it would look really bad if you only got $1.40 per line. The land market is a lot better than that.
But this is like a 6-year program.
We look at this every year because these numbers are going to be different every year. And so, you know, again, our premise is we want to try as much as possible to set up our operation to make a $40 return for our labor management per ewe.
Not per lamb, but
Per ewe. Okay. And what that says is each one of them ewes, we have to market 1.85 lambs. In this particular model, with the numbers I put in order to do that. At that price, and that will come. Now our formula for profit is going to look totally different because, you know, we're going to plug in a market price and we're going to plug in 135 dollars. I think I included that. This will be just another look at it saying, okay, we're not going to sell these lambs at 80 pounds. We're going to take them to 125. We're going to get less money for them than we would for an 80-pound lamb. We still want to make $40 net return per ewe. What has to happen? Well, and then assuming you can do it with the same ewe, our lambing percentage marketed in this situation is only 144%. Our annual feed cost is the same. It's going to cost more money to feed that lamb. We gotta get it down for around $47 a lamb, because we're taking it to a heavier weight, take more feed. Our fixed costs for you and Belly stay the same, operating costs. And so what that says is that we can produce and market a smaller landing percentage if we take them to heavier weights. In other words, if we've done it right, we can put additional weight on a heck of a lot cheaper than what we were getting paid for the land. So the red here, and I hope I don't, it makes sense to me that we need to hold you. The previous example, we said, well, we have a set of ewes that will produce 185% lamb crop, and we're marketing 80-pound lambs. Well, if that same set of ewes, we could take that same set of lambs and feed them to 125 pounds, even though we know we're going to get less per pound. Well, if we did that, and we market 185% lamb crop, we're going to have an $82 return to the weight on that. So instead of 40, we're going to have 82. Okay? So, just another look at it. There is value to taking lambs to heavier weights. Now, I'll back up to the first one. Okay, so, what do we need? What does this model, if we're going to sell 80-pound lambs, what has to happen in this model for us to make that same $82 I just told you that feeding your lambs to heavier weights would do? Okay? Well, what needs to happen is you need to get 42 cents a pound more for these 80-pound lambs than what you're going to get for 125-pound lamb. So in other words, you got to get more money for this 80-pound lamb. Now we still got to market this 185% lamb crop, which is easy to talk about, is harder to do. We talk 200% in our area, but it's easy to talk about it. It's really hard to do. I'm talking about marketing, not dropping on the ground.
Down here, will we get $1.40 per lamb?
I really don't. Jesse can tell you more than I can. They're asking for you to bid on their lambs for the next one.
Well, it's probably going to be, the market right now, probably going to be in $1.25, $1.30. And we're talking a 40 to 60-pound lamb, where you're talking about big lambs. And those big lambs, 80-pound lambs up there, you're talking about down here, our market is going to be in the dollar range. Because our market don't want that 80-pound lamb.
So you have, and I'm, like I said, I plugged in numbers, you gotta plug in your own, okay? But I'm just trying to make some points about what does it take to make money in the sheep business? And I maybe can just close on that. You know, I used to ask my grandfather and father this all the time, and they gave me the same answer all the time. And I always thought they were crazy, but as I was growing up, you know, it's as simple as this: you got to keep your language percentage marketed high, and your feed costs low. That's profitability is driven off those two things. And you know what? I don't know what this lamb market will do. I do know this about the ethnic market. There are times of the year when they're worth a lot more money than other times. And there's a nice calendar. I don't know, maybe Jesse, you have it. But there's a calendar that you put together of when the certain ethnic holidays are. And if I were producing sheep in your area and your market is an ethnic market size lamb, 80-pound lamb, I'd be looking at that calendar when the certain ethnic holidays are, and I'd make sure I was producing lambs that I could be marketing ahead of those days. Okay, so that means you got to have a production plan here now. You got to look at what the market is and when you're likely going to get the most money, produce lambs to be on that market. And there's about, and I'm not an expert on that, but there's about 12 ethnic holidays for different ethnic groups. And then, you know, the dates, you know, at the beginning of the, I mean, we know what the dates are, when those holidays are. Then you need to look at, okay, can I produce lambs to have them ready before a week or two ahead of each one of these holidays? Because that's when they're going to be worth the most. And then once those holidays pass, the little bit I've seen in our area is that price could drop 50 cents a pound or 80 cents a pound. Because, you know, they don't want them in. They have the lamb for their holiday and they don't want them until the next holiday. So So you've got to do your due diligence and homework on if you're going to sell ethnic size lambs, ethnic market size lambs, which, as Jesse said, are 40 to 80, he said?
Well, really, the ideal is from 40 to 60, and then whenever you get from 60 to 80, well, the market comes down, unless, like you say, there is a couple of holidays of the ethnic groups that want bigger lambs, and if they want the bigger lambs, then they'll pay more for bigger lambs. So you got to, you just got to juggle it around.
Well, so the bottom line from my perspective is you got to know your market. You got to know your market. We know our market. You got to know your market and produce to meet the market. It's good business.
And two, like people have to realize that we're dealing with two markets: the ethnic market, which is the non-traditional sheep market, which is smaller, and your traditional sheep market, which is bigger for the restaurants, and the West Coast, East Coast for the high-end type land.
Yep.
And it's all together different. And down here, dealing with the market, and a wool lamb will bring 20 cents, 25 cents less than a half sheep.
And, you know, in our area, it's the other way around. And the reason for it is the pelts rate today, wool pelts worth $10, $11 a piece, and hair pelts are $0. And so when we go to sell our lambs, we look at that and say, well, you know, we can't afford to give up $8 to $10 a lamb because of pelt. So it's, again, it's a matter of knowing the market and producing to meet the market. And that'll change those numbers. I mean, I'm just trying to tell you there's some cost of production, and what you need to do is sit down and figure out, okay, you know, this is what I'm going to get, this is the size lamb I have, I want to make $40 net return for you. It's what, you know, you got to know what your formula for profit is. I can't sit here and tell you what you're doing. Now, if I raised sheep in this area for about 4 or 5 years, I'd be able to tell you. I can tell you it's greatly different between our sheep operation in Pipestone and the one in Wyoming. They're two completely different situations. Yes, Jim?
And your ewe feed cost will change with the size of the lamb. You need a much smaller ewe for a 60 to 80 pound lamb. You don't need the 180 pound ewes that you need in Pipestone. You need a much better.
And the other thing is that if somebody pumped me into Arkansas and said, you've got to raise sheep in Arkansas, the first breed not breed, but I'd be looking at hair sheep. I mean, now in Minnesota, I'm not even going to consider it because of how we market our lambs. But if you put me in this state and said you got to make sheep production work, I'm going to try it with hair sheep first because of parasite resistance, because of heat tolerance. There's some tremendous advantages, and you got to look at your climate, and you got to match genetics to the system. No question about it. Just make sure they have lots of lambs, and that we're able to feed them relatively cheap. I'll end on this note. You know, what we've talked about today is just the start. I mean, if you're thinking about getting into sheep business, you know, we've only flirted. Okay. There's so much more you need to know about this industry to be successful in terms of nutrition and genetics, health, marketing. We've talked a little bit about marketing, but you know, your production plan, your sheep management, your sheep care skills, you know, record keeping. There's just so much more to the sheep business than what we've even addressed today. And so if you're going to enter the sheep business, understand that you need to learn a lot more. And it's a never-ending process. I've been in it all my life, and I'm learning every day. And you know, if we can help Pipestone Lamb and Wool program, we do offer some online courses on sheep management, nutrition, and so on. We have some correspondence courses. They are things that might help you learn more about how to run a sheep operation and how to do some of these things. So With that, I'll answer any other questions until they tell me I have to get the heck out of the stage.
Tell you what we'll do.
Oh, I'm gonna have to get the heck
No,
out of the
no,
stage.
no. We want you to stay on stage, but if Dr. Ann Wells will be our afternoon speaker, and Charlie Williams with NRCS and the USDA Strike Force Initiative, Tanya Washington is with Farm Service Agency, and Ralph Harris is also with NRCS. If y'all will be making your way over here, we'll have a Q&A, so if you all have any questions that may be directed to some of these other folks. But first, thank you, Mike.